Hello and welcome to another episode of Spiritual Guidance 101. We have with us today Abuna David Hanna from St. Mary, Chicago. Abuna, thank you for being with us today. Today's topic that we received from the youth is a heavy topic. It's something that we learn in school, and it's something that we are, kind of torn between school and church, where it's the topic of evolution. And, maybe a good way to start off this topic would be explaining, according to the Bible, according to Genesis' accounts, how was the world created?
That's a very loaded topic. The world was created, according to the biblical account of Genesis, in different stages, or the word that is used is days. But let's just call it stages for now. In the first stage, God created light. That was one of the first aspects of creation, was God created light. And he separated light from darkness. Then in the second stage, or day 2, he created the Earth's atmosphere, sort of the sky, and separated what's called the firmament, or the heavens, from the earth. So that was day 2. In day 3, he created the oceans and the land and vegetation and plants and trees that bear fruit. And then on day 4, he created the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the other planets. So that's stage 4. Stage 5, he created other types of creatures, like the birds. And then on day 6, he created animals and humans. So that's sort of how the biblical account of Genesis goes.
And so is this like a literal of what happened each day? Because we know there's dinosaurs, and their fossils said that they were there for millions of years. And how does that fit into the Genesis story?
And I think that's why you use the word stages.
That's why I use the word stages, because many people get caught up on the word day to try to calculate some sort of time based on the day. But I use the word stages because if you recall what I said, the sun and the stars and everything was created on day 4. And we measure a day by the rotation of the earth around the sun. So if there was no sun, so then how do you have a day? So a day is not really a 24-hour period the way we know it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I find interesting is that if you think about the order of creation as was described, is you'll see that it sort of is very similar actually to what is proposed by evolutionary theory in terms of the order of creatures, and even in the scientific community. If you notice, light is created the first thing. Light is energy. Light is time. So actually time started day 1, or the first stage, because light has a velocity. A velocity needs time. And even in the theories of the Big Bang, one of the things is that they needed lots of energy to do the Big Bang. So I see that the story of Genesis is actually very consistent in some aspects to evolutionary theory.
So we can say that there is a parallel maybe between the stories of the creation in Genesis and the Big Bang Theory. There is a parallel between the two?
Definitely. I see it. It's very obvious. The one thing I would maybe caution is that the Bible is not a science book. Okay? The Bible was not intended for scientists but what's amazing is, even though the book was not intended for the scientists, that many of the things that, as we mentioned, are consistent with
scientific findings.
So that lends, some credence to what is mentioned in the book of Genesis.
But if we look first, what is the Big Bang? Can you go over what the Big Bang is?
Yeah. So actually, the Big Bang is a theory for the foundation or the start of the universe. And the reason they came up with this idea of the Big Bang is that what they've noticed, and this is kind of relatively recently, is that the universe is expanding. The universe is expanding. And actually our scientists now are so precise that they can measure how much the universe is expanding. So if you know something is expanding at a certain rate, so imagine like it's expanding, what they did is they said, okay, let's reverse.
Mm-hmm.
And when they reversed that rate of expansion, it came to a single point. So the universe started in a single point. And at some point in time, which they know the time, but everything breaks down before that time, is that something started. And that's what they call the Big Bang.
So it's not really a matter of, the universe being infinite. The Big Bang theory suggests that there was growth, and there really can't be growth to something that's infinite.
Yeah. So as I said, the universe is growing, is expanding, and so the Big Bang is now the reverse of that, coming to a point, and then finding that point and saying something happened at that point, which Christians will say is the creation.
We can move on to the next maybe aspect of it, which is Darwinism. And a common misunderstanding of Darwinism is that, people say that the belief is that we come from monkeys, which I think the actual belief of Darwinism is that we share common genetic traits. Maybe you can expand on that, or if you know the science behind that, and possibly explain, do we believe that maybe these findings are true, or do we not believe that they're true, or is there some truth behind it?
No, there's definitely a lot of truth to the fact that primates share, I can't remember the percentage, but it was a very high percentage. I think it's above like 99% of the genetic makeup of humans. There's no doubt about that, and there's nothing that we could say to, say that that's incorrect. It's a scientific fact. What we can't, and I think the limit is, even though there is only a 1% difference in our DNA, that 1% difference is remarkable, right? It's very small relative to the amount of base pairs in DNA, but that 1% is not something negligible, clearly, because if I look at you, you don't look like a primate, yeah. So and the intellect of humans is different than the intellect of, and so what I'm trying to say is that even though the similarities exist, there's still not proof that one became another. We've seen that with other creatures, right? We can see that maybe with different species of dogs, for instance. Maybe there was one dog and one dog became different. We haven't seen that for humans. And so there is some basis or some need there are some gaps in the scientific community in the evolutionary theory. And there are some gaps in the Christian line of thinking, honestly. There is some gap. I can't explain to you exactly, the science behind the formation of man. But what I would ask everyone to do is to be honest about where those gaps lie. Because I think all too often, maybe the scientists try to cover their gaps, right? And there's many other, even philosophical questions that evolve from that premise of being evolutionary creatures. If we are just the consequence of time and the right chemical composition, then what is our purpose? What are we doing here? Why does it matter if you die or someone kills you? Like, animals die all the time. Why do we have rules against? There's something deeper than just,
So you can't really say that there's any way that it's not right that we have evolved from monkeys. Like that's not
Yeah, because
And
when we
there's
were
monkeys now. Like you see monkeys in the zoo. If I feel like if we did evolve from monkeys, there wouldn't be monkeys left. At one point, they would.
well, so one of the things about evolution, obviously, they say is like it happens over millions,
Yeah.
millions of years. So no matter how long we would sit and observe, we wouldn't be able to see
Okay.
because that's what their response would be to something like that.
But I think also that in the Bible it says like we were made in God's image.
In God's image. We
And-
were made in God's
Yeah.
image. We were not the result of chance. We're not the result of chance. We were the result of intelligent design. That's why the first thing we say in our creed is we believe in one God, God the Father, the Pantocrator,
Who created the heavens and
He is the creator. And that's the foundation of our beliefs, that He is, and we are His creation, and we were created in His image and likeness. So to say we are the product of chance, or that we evolved from some, just as a consequence of natural selection, or something, is missing a part of life, if you will.
So then, is there like a line? We know that the Bible is not a scientific book, nor is it like a historical book per se. But is there a line that you can draw between this Genesis story of like the metaphorical Genesis versus the scientific Genesis, or is there proof that this actually happened?
So there's two things that I could say about that. One, so let's start with maybe the first. Is it metaphorical or not metaphorical? Or where's the boundary? I think both camps, the scientists and the hard right-wing creationists, are both trying to sort of discredit the other. And I think really there's no fruit or benefit to do that. I think, like we said at the beginning, our Bible is not a science book. It is a story of God's love for mankind. And creationists would do themselves a favor if they took that stance and were not trying to be so adamantly against some of the scientists. And the scientists should also humbly admit their own sort of things that, because it's not crystal clear. And as much as they'd like to say it's very clear, there is still lots of gaps. I mean, there's different theories about how the first cells came about in the atmosphere and they have some scientific evidence to suggest it was that way. But at the end of the day, the scientific proof is not at the level that even like chemists would that you would experience in a lab today. Like if I was a scientist, I was a scientist for like the pharmaceutical industry, and if I would have presented evidence the way evolutionary theory is presented, I don't think there would be any drugs on the market now. Now you need concrete facts that this molecule will do this and bind to certain receptors and will lead certain, and that type of scientific proof is not existent, and is and scientists would do themselves a favor if they admitted some of that. The other thing is, I would say, you were talking about how how do we know Genesis is true?
Mm-hmm. Or if it's true.
If it's true. One thing I would say is Genesis is part of a much larger story. Like the book of Genesis doesn't just stop at creation. It continues. It continues with the story of Noah, then it goes to the stories of Abraham, then it goes to the stories of Joseph, then it talks about Moses, and it talks about all these things. So since Genesis is tied to other things, and I start looking at, well, the truth of Abraham, or I look at the truth of Moses, were the people of Israel, the Israelites enslaved, and I say, wow, that's a truth. There were, and archaeologists, everyone will not, or is in agreement that there were periods where the Israelites were in Egypt. Or if you look even further and you see the history of the kings, you said that the Bible's not a history book, but there is definitely a lot of history in the Bible. And when I look at the history that's in the Bible, and you see that the kings that are mentioned in the Bible match up with archaeologists' findings, and then you start to see, wow, there's a lot of truth
What's being said.
to all of it being said.
Yeah.
So then it becomes one package, right? Like Genesis is a small part of a large package. It'd be very foolish to just look at Genesis one chapter and then neglect the rest of the Bible. We know the rest of the Bible is true, so that also is an indication that the first chapter is true. Is it proof? No. Do we believe it? Yes. Which is the same idea that I wish the scientists would also, admit to their ideas of evolution.
All right. Thank you very much for the clarification. But unfortunately, we are out of time. But we did cover a lot of ground, so thank you for that. And for our viewers, thank you for watching. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions about this topic or any future topic, our email is on the screen, so feel free to email us with anything that you might want to ask. And I want to thank you again for joining us. It was a pleasure.